Kia ora, my name is Justine Driver and I am the Deputy Principal at Pakuranga Heights School. Last year I completed my thesis on teaching as inquiry studying through UNITEC. This presentation forms part of my 3-minute thesis competition that I completed at UNITEC, and it is presented in an Edu-ignite format. I believe that children are the future. Teach them well and let them lead the way. It makes sense that if today's children are tomorrow's future, then giving them the best educational opportunities goes without saying. And therefore, the teaching and learning in our schools needs to be effective in raising outcomes for students and teachers. Simple? However, this is a dilemma faced by educators across the decades, because schools are dynamic places and teaching is a complex activity. The teaching as inquiry model is promoted in the revised New Zealand curriculum as an important aspect of effective pedagogy. Pedagogy, simply put, is the art of effective teaching, and in particular those teacher actions that progress student learning. The Ministry promote that inquiry can be thought of in 2 ways, as a cycle of learning and as a way of being. Now, research shows that the term teaching as inquiry is confusing for many teachers. Why? Well, for many educators, teaching students using inquiry methods is not new. Here, teachers teach children how to learn by accessing what they know, want to know, and how to find the new information they seek. This has commonly been called inquiry teaching, a similar sounding term which creates the confusion. However, for teachers to adopt teaching as inquiry as a professional way of being requires a change of mindset for the way that teachers are to view their professional activity. This is a much harder shift. Teaching as inquiry is a process of systematic, rigorous and critical self-reflection about professional practice and the context in which it occurs, in ways that we question our taken for granted assumptions. Its purpose is to inform decision-making for action to raise student outcomes. As an aspiring principal for our next generation, how will I ensure that my staff, school and learning community are engaged in inquiry as a way of being? This is where my research is based. I examined the systems that school leaders used to promote a culture of inquiry in order to understand practices that can be employed to ensure that teaching as inquiry occurs. Because developing and sustaining systems to support and enhance learning is an expectation of effective leadership, then what is problematic is that not enough is known about A. the prevalence in schools that the practice of teaching as inquiry occurs, B. what systems promote and sustain inquiry, and C. subsequently, what challenges school leaders and teachers face when implementing professional inquiry-based practices. In my investigation of the literature, I examined teaching as inquiry as an effective pedagogy, as a vehicle for teacher professional learning and development, and as a mechanism for sustained school improvement through leaders creating organisational learning. So how did I go about doing this? My research was undertaken in 2 phases. Firstly, I undertook a baseline questionnaire of a small geographical area of schools and had an overwhelming response regarding the prevalence in schools that the practice of inquiry occurs, and at the same time undertook documentary analysis from national sources which helped to contribute to the literature review. And in the second phase, I had 3 schools that agreed to be part of my research, where I interviewed school leaders and teachers to gather different perspectives regarding teaching as inquiry practices within their context, and where supplied undertook a documentary analysis of school-created documents. So, I have discovered through a process of multi-level triangulation of the data collected from school leaders, teachers and documentation that the context in which teachers work plays a huge role in how teachers have adopted inquiry as a professional way of being, and therefore school leaders need to create the conditions for a culture of inquiry where professional dialogue prevails and staff are encouraged to collaboratively investigate their current assumptions and practice using evidence, so that teachers can be inquirers into their own practice and have a positive influence on student outcomes. I also would like to promote that the 2 ways of viewing teaching as inquiry could be understood at a procedural and at a conceptual level. If we view inquiry merely as a cycle of learning, this could be interpreted at a surface or procedural level, where teachers may comply with systems and processes for teaching as inquiry within their organisation without really engaging into the impact or relationship that their teacher action has on student outcomes. Where on the other hand, if we consider teaching as inquiry at a deeper conceptual level as a way of professional being, the possibilities for improved student outcomes, quality teaching practices and organisational learning increases. I believe teachers may engage in inquiry at the procedural level first, and over time and exposure to effective contextual conditions, they will adopt professional inquiry more as a way of professional being. I've summarised these findings in this diagram with the two ways of understanding inquiry, moving from the surface, compliant, procedural side towards the deep, embedded and conceptual understanding on the right as a way of professional being. The leadership activity required to move staff towards the deep level of understanding are those conditions of dialogue and trusting relationships that promote individual and organisational learning. The more staff can engage in effective conversations to reflect on the impact of their practice over time, may have a change in values will occur. And at the very bottom of the diagram, you can see that you've got the time and levels of engagement, you've got your levels of understanding from surface to deeper, and the change in values from being one of compliant to being embedded. So, teach them well and let them lead the way.